Do you know that 11 countries still force a married woman to get her husband's autograph for an abortion? Japan is the lone G7 holdout. When my body needs his pen. 500,000 vasectomies are snipped in the United States every year. 500,000 guys, 0 diapers. Courts order about 400,000 legal paternity tests a year. Roughly 120,000 men learn they're not the father. Swab, wait, plot twist. A Canadian clinic survey of 200 men found 55% felt sadness and 47% guilt while waiting for a partner's procedure. Guys cry in the lobby too. The planet clocks 121 million unintended pregnancies every year, roughly 4 every second. So every policy ripple lands on both halves of the species. Global oops moment, continuous loop. We have set up an artificial intelligence to explore the question, should men have the right to an abortion? Today, 2 sides will argue their position. One believes that men should have a legal say in reproductive decisions, including the right to opt out of fatherhood. The other insists that abortion rights belong solely to the person who carries the child, and male input cannot override bodily autonomy. Here's how our debate will proceed. Opening statements, argument development, rebuttals, questions, and answers. Don't skip ahead, watch the entire exchange and decide for yourself in the comments who made the stronger argument. If you're interested in the topic of debates, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and take part in the subscriber-only poll to help determine the winner.
In modern societies that value gender equality, reproductive rights are a cornerstone of bodily autonomy. Yet in discussions about abortion, men are often excluded, despite being equal participants in conception. If a woman has the legal right to terminate a pregnancy, should a man have the legal right to disclaim parental responsibility during early stages, effectively a financial and legal opt-out? Supporters of this idea argue that fairness requires symmetrical rights. Just as a woman can decide not to become a mother, a man should have the opportunity, within a defined time frame, to decline fatherhood obligations. This would not interfere with a woman's bodily autonomy, but would adjust financial and legal responsibilities. Advocates frame it not as abandonment, but as a formal declaration of non-consent to parenthood, paralleling a woman's right to choose. Equality before the law should include reproductive responsibilities.
Reproductive rights and bodily autonomy are fundamentally rooted in biology. Only women undergo pregnancy. Only they face the physical, emotional, and medical risks that come with it. While men should be included in discussions and decisions where possible, the ultimate choice about abortion must remain with the person who carries the fetus. Extending an equivalent, opt-out, right to men risks trivializing the unequal burdens of reproduction. Parenthood is more than a financial obligation. It includes care, support, and shared responsibility. Creating a legal escape hatch for men would disproportionately burden women and children, reinforcing inequality. True gender equity in reproduction doesn't mean identical rights but fair and compassionate systems that acknowledge biological realities and promote mutual responsibility.
Advocates for granting men an equivalent right to opt out of parenthood argue that reproductive justice must include both genders. The current legal framework allows a woman to choose between abortion, adoption, or parenting. A man, however, upon conception, is legally and financially bound to the outcome of the woman's decision, even if he has no say in it. This legal asymmetry raises critical ethical questions about fairness, autonomy, and gender equality. One of the strongest arguments in favor of a male opt-out right is the principle of bodily and financial autonomy. Just as a woman is not legally obligated to carry a pregnancy to term, a man should not be legally obligated to become a parent if he formally disclaims responsibility during the early stages of pregnancy. Such a right wouldn't infringe upon the woman's bodily autonomy or her decision to carry the pregnancy. Rather, it would solely affect the man's legal and financial obligations. Critics often equate this to abandonment. However, supporters counter that it's no different from a woman's right to decide whether she wants to assume parenthood. If the law recognizes that someone can change their mind about becoming a parent post-conception, then it should extend this principle to men under equitable terms. Many propose that the opt-out be time-bound, perhaps within the first trimester. mirroring the legal window for abortion in many countries. Beyond fairness, there's the psychological and emotional impact on men forced into unwanted parenthood. Being legally compelled to father a child against one's will can cause significant distress, financial strain, and long-term relational breakdowns. It can also damage the father-child relationship if the man is emotionally disengaged or unwilling from the outset. Respecting the reproductive autonomy of men could lead to more responsible family planning and reduce legal disputes surrounding paternity and child support. From a policy standpoint, giving men a legal opt-out could spark more serious conversations around contraception, shared responsibility, and early communication between partners. It could lead to reforms in sex education that stress mutual consent, not just in sexual activity, but in reproductive consequences as well. Importantly, this policy wouldn't absolve men of all obligations. Supporters generally agree that if a man chooses to remain involved, he must commit fully. But if he opts out legally and early, he shouldn't be penalized for respecting boundaries and acknowledging his limits. Lastly, equality before the law demands that both sexes be treated fairly in matters of reproduction. Women's rights have rightly expanded to include full control over their reproductive choices. Men, while biologically different in their roles, deserve a form of legal recognition that respects their autonomy too. This doesn't mean mirroring abortion rights exactly, but creating a legal framework that balances power, responsibility, and choice in a way that's just for all parties involved.
Opponents of granting men an equivalent, opt-out, right argue that reproduction is inherently asymmetrical due to biological realities, and thus legal symmetry is not only impractical but unjust. While men and women both contribute to conception, only women experience the full spectrum of physical, emotional, and medical consequences that come with pregnancy. The legal system has historically responded to these disparities by centering reproductive rights around the pregnant person. This is not gender discrimination but a recognition of biological fact. The cornerstone of the argument against male opt-out rights is the nature of pregnancy itself. Women bear the health risks, maternal mortality, chronic conditions like gestational diabetes, and the physical toll of labor. They also face professional and social consequences. These burdens do not have male equivalents. Therefore, while men should be involved in reproductive decisions when possible, their inability to carry a pregnancy justifies the absence of a symmetrical right to opt out. Moreover, legal opt-out mechanisms could create dangerous precedent. If a man could revoke responsibility early in the pregnancy, this would, in practice, shift the burden entirely onto the woman, both emotionally and economically. It would also risk institutionalizing paternal absence and detachment as legally endorsed behavior, which can have devastating long-term effects on child development and maternal well-being. Child support laws exist not merely to enforce financial responsibility, but to promote shared accountability for the upbringing of a new life. Proponents of male opt-outs argue from fairness, but critics respond that fairness must be contextualized. In practice, it is already harder for single mothers to access affordable childcare, housing, and medical care. A legal opt-out would disproportionately affect low-income women and worsen gender-based disparities in poverty rates. Women of color, already more likely to be single parents, would carry the heaviest burdens. There's also a concern that allowing legal opt-outs could discourage contraceptive responsibility. Knowing that financial and legal obligations can be avoided might lead some men to deprioritize safe sex or communication. It would shift the balance of accountability in an already uneven terrain, making it harder to cultivate a culture of mutual responsibility. Importantly, reproduction is not just a private agreement, it has public consequences. Every child brought into the world becomes part of society, and society has a vested interest in ensuring children have support from both parents. Legal disavowal of responsibility weakens this foundation. In sum, while the idea of male reproductive rights is not inherently problematic, any proposed legal opt-out must be weighed against the unequal burdens of pregnancy, the social costs of single parenting, and the long-term implications for children. True reproductive justice cannot be built on identical rights. It must consider the full context of responsibility, biology, and societal impact.
Opponents argue that granting men an opt-out right sounds fair in theory, but collapses under ethical and social scrutiny. First, it creates a false equivalence between bodily autonomy and financial responsibility. A woman's right to abortion protects her from the physical and psychological demands of pregnancy. A man, by contrast, doesn't experience these risks. Financial obligation is not comparable to 9 months of gestation, potential medical complications, and long-term health consequences. Second, allowing men to disclaim responsibility may deepen gender inequality. Women would retain full burden of child-rearing, emotionally, physically, and financially, if men could legally walk away. This disproportionate impact, especially on economically vulnerable women, would be regressive. Children, too, would bear the consequences of being legally abandoned by one parent before birth. Further, critics argue that introducing a legal opt-out might reduce men's incentive to practice responsible contraception. If men know they can exit consequences post-factum, the incentive to use condoms, have honest conversations, or plan families responsibly might diminish. Finally, there are societal consequences. Legal parenthood isn't just about financial support. It reflects shared responsibility in raising the next generation. Creating a mechanism for legal disavowal could normalize disengagement and erode the cultural expectation that both parents, regardless of the circumstances of conception, owe something to their child. Equity doesn't always mean identical rights. It means context-sensitive justice. Reproduction is inherently unequal biologically, and laws must reflect that reality.
Proponents of male opt-out rights argue from the standpoint of fairness, but this fairness often overlooks the biological and societal asymmetries involved in reproduction. While it may seem equitable to allow men a legal exit from parenthood when women can access abortion, this comparison fails to recognize the underlying rationale of abortion rights, bodily autonomy. A woman's decision to terminate a pregnancy is about preventing invasive, life-altering changes to her body, not merely opting out of financial responsibility. Granting men a similar opt-out, especially one tied solely to financial and legal obligations, reduces the complex ethics of parenthood to a transactional exchange. Children are not contracts, they are human beings with needs. Allowing men to legally disavow those responsibilities would create a class of children born with state-sanctioned paternal abandonment, deepening existing inequalities and putting further pressure on social welfare systems. Moreover, the opt-out proposal assumes that all pregnancies are the result of mutual decision-making, which is not always the case. Contraceptive failures, reproductive coercion, or lack of access to healthcare often complicate this narrative. Creating a framework that enables men to withdraw support could lead to exploitation and disproportionately harm women who are already economically and socially vulnerable. Supporters claim this legal mechanism would lead to more responsibility and communication, but the opposite is more likely. The safety net of legal withdrawal could reduce incentives for open discussions about contraception, child planning, and mutual consent. True reproductive justice must reflect the unequal burdens carried by those who bear children. While we must strive for inclusivity in reproductive discussions, equality in rights must not come at the expense of justice and care for those most affected, women and children.
Moderator's question: if men were granted the legal right to opt out of parenthood, what would be the long-term consequences for children born into such arrangements?
Granting men the right to opt out would not mean children are left unsupported. Instead, it would ensure that those who choose to be involved are truly committed, reducing emotional neglect and resentment. A legal opt-out would need to be paired with state-supported safety nets to protect children's welfare. In the long term, this could lead to a society where parenthood is entered more intentionally and where support systems compensate for absent parents, much like adoption or state guardianship today. Ultimately, children deserve parents who want to be there, not ones forced by law.
Children need more than willing parents, they need stable support from both. Legalizing paternal opt-out sends a message that fatherhood is optional. This undermines familial stability and creates a system where women and social services carry the burden. In practice, many children would suffer from financial insecurity and psychological harm caused by perceived or real abandonment. The ripple effects, higher poverty rates, strained welfare systems, and emotional trauma, would be long-lasting. Laws should protect the most vulnerable, not permit their neglect.
Thanks for watching. Now it's your turn. Let us know in the comments who you think won this debate. Don't forget to cast your vote and tell us why. And if you enjoyed this content, make sure to hit that subscribe button. More debates are coming your way. See you next time.